At 5, people rallied at the CDC today over the agency's definition of Lyme disease. They say the symptoms requirements make it too difficult to get care.
So the issue in our story today is this. The medical establishment believes Lyme is a short-term disease. Many sufferers say they've had it for years and years, and they need better medicine and better medical care than they're currently getting.
So I first realized I had Lyme in 2009.
I first found out that I had Lyme disease in 1987.
So they gave me 3 weeks of doxycycline
And sent me on my way.
I finished my 3-week cycle, and the next week I was worse than I ever was. And I called the doctor back, and she said, "You probably have rheumatoid arthritis."
I went to a neurologist who told me that I had multiple sclerosis.
And it got so bad that I started taking my friend's dog's doxycycline, and I felt better. And that was when my husband said, "You can't take dog medication. This is ridiculous."
I went to Dr. Horowitz and found out that it was actually Lyme disease the entire time.
So Lyme disease is a bacterial infection that most people get from the bite of an infected tick. It can also be transmitted from a mother to her unborn child. Only about 50% of the people get a rash when they get a tick bite. It's primarily a clinical diagnosis, which is people will generally complain of good and bad days where the symptoms come and go. So people will have a constellation of symptoms. They'll be tired, headaches, stiff neck, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, memory concentration problems, difficulty falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, and having this migratory pain. This can all happen from Lyme and from associated co-infections.
When a person is diagnosed with Lyme disease, they are given a standard antibiotic treatment to combat the disease. If they still exhibit symptoms after this treatment, then they have chronic Lyme.
Lyme disease greatly affected my career because at the time I was in my 20s, I was working in Manhattan, loved my job, I traveled, I did work with American Express and I traveled all over the country and I loved it. I was a typical 20-year-old full of energy. Lyme disease totally wiped that out.
Sometimes my Lyme got so bad that I didn't want to miss school, so I would get myself to school and I would go into the supply closet. I would sleep on the gym mats in the closet just to get some sleep so that I could get through the day.
So when I created the Hudson Valley Healing Art Center years ago, I mainly did it with the model that we would be treating chronically ill people. And what was happening is people were coming for me from all over the United States. They were coming to me from Europe. We wanted a center where we could treat these people in a comprehensive manner. Our center practices a form of medicine that I would refer to as integrative medicine. Some people call it alternative, but it's called integrative medicine.
If this is a spectrum of healthcare, and this would be considered, for instance, very traditional allopathic medicine, don't do any poor supplements, and this would be, say, very alternative indeed. And I don't mean anything pejorative by either end of the spectrum. We think that we're in the middle. We're not herbalists or we're not acupuncturists. We're not going to customize something for somebody with a little bit of this herb and a little bit of that. Or these are things that are made up specifically by companies with the idea that if someone has the Western medical diagnosis of, say, Lyme disease or Bartonella infection, these are things that can be used.
The treatments I received from Dr. Horowitz were pretty intense at times. Sometimes it's antibiotics, sometimes it's Chinese herbal medications, sometimes it's something called a Cowdwin protocol, where you're mixing little drops of water with little herbs, and you don't think, you're like taking one little drop of an herb and you're like, what's that going to do? So one time he said, start just one drop for 3 weeks. Don't go any more. And I was like, what is one drop going to do? So I did more, and I got very, very sick. And he took me off that very quickly.
I'm Assemblymember Dee Dee Barrett. We are very grateful to the Poughkeepsie Library District and the Boardman Road Library to partner with us on this event. So we launched the social media campaign, #GetTickedOff, a couple of months ago. The goal of our initiative really is to continue to work to spread awareness and education and information and activism around Lyme and tick-borne disease.
I absolutely believe that this is a moment in time where we need to be putting the resources and the education both to the public and to the medical community about how pervasive this is. And that's why we launched our #GetTickedOff campaign, because we think people should be getting ticked off about the lack of attention and resources for these diseases.
Without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Richard Horowitz.
I really became familiar with his work through developing legislation. We passed a bill a couple of years ago, which was somewhat controversial, to make sure that the doctors who are doing the kind of work that he's doing are protected from harassment.
What can happen to doctors who choose to treat it like it's not that month-solving illness, that it is indeed chronic?
This is a real crisis. What happens is these guidelines are treated essentially as though they were regulations. And so what happens is if a physician goes outside of the guidelines, they might find themselves before a medical board with the risk of losing their medical license. So there's a very, the IDSA has been very aggressive about enforcing its guidelines, and when physicians step outside, they run the risk of losing their license.
So I'm going to speak to you this morning about some of the advances of what's happened in Lyme and tick-borne diseases in the past several years. In the last 20 years, there's been a 320% increase in the counties affected, from Pennsylvania basically spreading out.
Every state in the United States now has had someone who has been exposed to Lyme disease. So we're in the middle of a spreading epidemic. I think it's greatly underdiagnosed at this point. It's difficult to know the exact number of people, but the CDC is estimating at least 350,000 people per year that are being affected. And we know that 86% of our healthcare costs are due to chronic disease. 70% of the deaths in our country are due to chronic disease. And we don't have a model to explain all this chronic disease. People need to really be aware that tick prevention is absolutely essential. Everybody's got to be doing tick checks when they come in, because some of these tick-borne infections are transmitted within 5 minutes. So it's not like the tick has to be on for 24 hours.
Things in the field remain controversial about what people think is chronic Lyme, and the work he's doing is so important.
Yeah, Dr. Horowitz is wonderful, and again, thank God other doctors now are accepting the fact, because it's hard.
And like Dr. Horowitz, he's the only person that helped me.
The most important thing is compassion. Exchange yourself with others, put yourself in their shoes, and do for them what you would want done for yourself. And I was treating all of these sick patients with Lyme disease. About 75 to 80% who would come in with a bullseye rash would get better with doxycycline, but about 20 to 25% would relapse and get sick. So by holding on to that tenet of compassion, of I have to work for the benefit of others, I have to figure out what's wrong with them, as if I was sick or my wife was sick, I started looking for answers for these people. And 30 years later, by just following this as kind of the rudder for my ship, everything has gone well.
If you're not getting the treatment from the doctor that you feel is what you need, then you just need to go to another doctor. It's an awful disease, and you just need to be treated. Can't be ignored.
Well, we are making headway, and definitely there is hope. And again, we'll see how much we'll be able to help the American people, because we have a bad epidemic on our hands, and it's an honor for me to be able to serve at this level to help. I hope that we will have some, not necessarily clear answers on all fronts, but at least things that are going to move our agenda ahead for our country, just because there's so many people that have been suffering for so long with this disease.
It's about time you got tested for Lyme. Wanna pick off the tick real quick before the devil gets within. Rhyme full of Lyme to steal my mind. Sure could use it for a little more time. It hurts over here, it hurts over there. It hurts in places everywhere. It hurts in my fingers and it hurts in my toes. It hurts in places where nobody goes. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.